The next step is going to be to create a new script that is going to define the behavior of these inventory item toggles that we've made. So I'm going to go to my scripts directory. I'm going to make a new C# script, and I'm going to name it after those inventory item toggles. So I'm actually going to call it inventory menu item toggle, because I just want to make it clear that this is about the inventory menu. And I've got the toggle part on here just to make it clear that like this thing at its core is a toggle. So it's, I don't know, just to help clarify what it actually is. So before I forget, I should go ahead and put this inventory menu item toggle script on my inventory item toggle prefab thing here. Maybe, yeah, so I'll put it on there and I will apply it very quickly. Where is that button? Overrides, apply all. So that way they should all, at this point, have this script on them, because I applied it to the prefab, and these are all instances of the prefab. So let's open this script up in the Visual Studio, and let's just kill this stuff real quick and start thinking about what this thing needs to do. Well, every one of these inventory menu item toggles, they need to be essentially linked to an actual inventory item. So I'm going to make a variable for that. So private, and the type of this thing is going to be an inventory object, and I'm going to call it associated inventory object. So to put this in terms of our buttons here, or our toggles rather, each of these toggles is going to be associated with an inventory object. So that makes sense, hopefully. And now what we're going to want to do is customize the inventory menu item toggle based on the associated inventory object. So what that means is we're going to, I think, essentially just change the icon to match whatever object is stored in there, first of all, at least. So this script needs to know about that icon, which, if we remember, the icon is an image. It's an image type. So I'm going to need a private image, which is in the Unity UI namespace. So we have to add that using statement, and then we'll understand what an image is. And I'm going to call this icon image, just to clarify that this is the image that is meant to represent the icon for this inventory menu item. And we can't really initialize this with get component or anything like that, because if you pay attention to how these inventory item toggles are set up, there are a whole bunch of there are many images involved. So there's actually no images on the actual game object that has the script. If we start looking at its children, this one has an image, this one has an image, and this one has an image. So it would be very difficult to we can't use get component because there's no images on here, and we can't use get component in children because there's multiple images in the children. So what I'm going to do instead is just make this a serialized field, which, the drawback is now we have to manually assign that, but it will allow us to carefully specify just what image we're talking about. And I'm going to go ahead and add a tooltip, I guess, because It's just clarity, and that's good. So we'll say the image component used to show the associated objects icon. Hopefully that's clear. Save. Go back to the editor. Once it compiles, we should see that. There it is. So we're going to be careful. At this point, I'm going to actually delete all of them but one, just to make sure we don't get confused and like drag the icon image from a different toggle in. So you can see here, here's a little trick. If you hold Alt and then click this collapse arrow, it actually collapses like everything all the way. If I hold Alt and then expand it, it'll expand everything all the way. Anyway, I just want to hold Alt and collapse everything, and then I'm just going to only manually expand what I need to, just because that's kind of getting a little chaotic. There's a ton of stuff. Okay, here we go. So I've got this one inventory item toggle inside of my scroll view. And I just wanted to delete the extra ones to make sure I didn't accidentally grab an icon image from a different one of these. Now that there's only one, there's no chance I can mess that up. So I'm going to drag the icon image game object into this icon image serialized field I made. And now that will take care of initializing that. I'm going to go ahead and add this to my prefab. So I clicked overrides, apply all. You can see what it's going to do. It's going to set this icon image. It's going to create that connection for all of my inventory item toggles. So that's good. I won't have to ever do that again. There's no chance I can mess it up going forward. It's built into the prefab now. That's a good thing. So now, if I go back to Visual Studio, I'm gonna hit Control comma and type in inventory object and go to my inventory object class. I've got all these serialized fields for the object's name, the object's description, the object's icon. I'm going to need to expose this information to the inventory menu item toggle by way of the associated inventory object here. So we have an instance of an inventory object. It's just that most of this stuff I need to know about is not public. Oops, that's the wrong class. Here we go. So I don't want to just go in and change these to be public. I want to do like what I've done here, where I've made a property that exposes it like that. So I will go ahead and just make properties that are very similar. So I need one for the icon, which is a sprite. So we'll say public sprite icon, and it will just point directly to the lowercase I icon. So this way, outside classes, they cannot change this. They can only read it. So it's like a read-only property. Let's see, we also have this description. So we're going to need that as well. So we'll say public string description. And that's just going to point to lowercase d description. And I think between icon name and description, that's the three main important things. The data structure of an inventory object, so to speak. So now they are all exposed so that if we were to look at the associated inventory object, I don't know, I'm just going to get start in here just for an example. I could say associated inventory object dot, and you can see we've got the description, we've got the icon, we've got the object name. So all that stuff is now exposed to the outside world. Okay, so I'm just gonna delete this. That was just there to show us how it was going. I guess I can kind of show a quick demonstration. Let's get the start back in here real quick. Just for the sake of you all understanding where I'm going with this, let's temporarily change the associated inventory object to, we'll make it a serialized field. How about that? This is just for a temporary demonstration. And in start here, I am going to say that the icon image is, if you hit period, you'll see that the image component has a sprite. And if you weren't sure about that, you could look here. Here's the icon image. What is the source image? It's of the type sprite, which it may be difficult to see that. Let's see what happens if I were to actually backspace that out. You can see, yep, it's a sprite. I mean, I'm just going to hit Control Z to get that back in there. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to set the sprite equal to the associated inventory object dot icon. That makes sense. So that way, all of the icon or all of the inventory objects won't have to have the same icon. We'll update the inventory menu item toggle to have the icon of whatever its associated inventory object is. So let's save this really quickly. Let's go back to Unity. And I think in order to really demonstrate this, we're going to need another. Right now we only have this note icon. So we need one more icon here. I've got a key icon image search here with the free to share and use filter on. So I don't know, pick a key that you like that's free to share and use and download it. So I will save this thing. I'm going to name it something better, like key icon, and save. I already have one because I've done this already. No big deal, I just replaced it. Now back here, I'm going to drag that icon in. So show in folder. Where did it go? I had this opened on the wrong monitor. Okay, key icon, and we are going to drag it into here. Alright, I got my key icon. It doesn't look right at all. What's the deal? Don't forget, since this is a 3D project, we have to go in and set all of the texture types that are meant to be sprites to sprites. Alright, and then I'm going to hit apply. And now we can just kind of test what that looks like. I'm going to go replace the note icon source image with the key icon and just confirm that it displays correctly, and it does. So now let's get out of 2D mode. I'm going to go find my note. Remember, I have a note and a key here. So for the note, I want to make sure that it has the note icon. For the key, I want to make sure that it has the key icon. There we go. And so let's save this. So let's go to our inventory menu, find a toggle, and we have made this temporary associated inventory object serialized field here. So I'm going to try dragging the key in for one of them. So this particular inventory item toggle is associated with the key. I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this. So Control D. And inside of this second one, I'm going to put the note. So one of my inventory item toggles is associated with the note. The other is associated with the key. And so I believe now if I run the game, it will update those icons because that is in the start method here. So it's updating the icon to match the associated inventory object icon. And you can see that it worked. So we're not updating the text or anything else yet, the name here, that'll come later. I just wanted to demonstrate that there's a method to this madness, and it's just a long haul. Okay, so I told you that this serialized field was temporary, just so we could test what was happening. So I'm going to get rid of it now before I forget, because we're not going to have the designer manually add inventory objects to the menu. That needs to happen when the player picks them up. So maybe this is a reasonable time to implement that. So if I go to my inventory menu, I'm going to need to make a new serialized field up here at the top of this class. I'm going to say that this serialized field is private and it's of the type inventory oh no, I lied. This is going to be of the type game object. And what it's going to be for is it's going to be for the prefab that represents our inventory item toggle here. So I'm going to call this lowercase I, inventory menu item toggle prefab. And I could put any game object in here, so it's important that the designer knows what they're doing with this. But I think our name has made it pretty crystal clear, hopefully. So if I save and go to Unity and I look at my inventory menu, now on the inventory menu script here, I have a spot where I can drag in the inventory menu item toggle prefab. So let's look at my prefabs. Here's the inventory item toggle. Let's drag that in there. So now this script knows about this prefab. And what I want this script to do is be able to generate prefabs. So let's go ahead and write that function. We can go ahead and put it right here, I suppose. We'll make it, well, I know this one's going to need to be public because we're going to want to call this from elsewhere, I think. Basically, we're going to need to be able to call this function that I'm about to create from wherever the player picks up items, and that happens outside of this class. So I need to make this public. And I'm going to name it, so it'll be public void add item to menu. And actually, it's going to need to have a parameter of the type inventory inventory object, and this parameter is going to specify the inventory object to add. So whenever you call this method, you're going to have to pass along a reference to an inventory object, and that is going to be the object that we add to our menu. So let's go ahead and make a summary for this so it's very clear, especially since we're going to call this from outside of the class. So we're going to say instantiates a new inventory menu item toggle prefab and adds it to the menu. Okay. How do you instantiate a prefab? This is a really common thing to do. For example, if you're going to spawn bullets, each bullet would be instantiating a prefab. If you were going to spawn maybe, I don't know, anything that is going to be cloned a lot. Maybe if you had an enemy spawner and it was spawning lots of enemies. If you had a health pack spawner and it was spawning lots of health packs. Anytime you're spawning lots of things over and over, you're generally going to use this instantiate method. So we're going to say instantiate, and we have to tell it, well, what are we going to instantiate? Well, we're going to instantiate the menu item prefab. So that's why we needed a reference to that prefab, so we can instantiate it whenever we want to add an item to the menu. Okay, so if we do this alone, this will add one of the prefabs to the menu. But there's some issues. I'll show you. Let's figure out where we're going to call it from, and then we'll be able to see what's going wrong with this once it's actually happening in our game. So at what point do we add an item to the menu? If we find the inventory item script, which I don't see it here, so I'm going to hit Control, comma. I'm going to type inventory object, and there it is. Hit enter to select it and bring it up. Open it in Visual Studio. Inside of the inventory object, there's the interact with method, which if you remember way back to the beginning, that's part of our interactive object, which is using the iInteractive interface. Anyway, when you interact with an inventory object, we are meant to be removing it from the game world here and then adding it to the inventory menu. We're adding it to the player inventory, we're just not adding it to the menu. So this is where I think it makes sense to add it to the menu, right here. So we can do, we can use our fancy singleton we spent all that time setting up. So inventory menu dot instance, so that's our singleton, dot add item to menu. And what's the item we're going to add? It has to be something of the type inventory object. Well, this very thing is an inventory object. So we can add this inventory object to the menu when you've interacted with it. Okay, let's save it. So if I think about this, if I walk up to like that note and I click on it, that will call interact with. It'll add it to the inventory data list, and it'll add it to the menu. What happens when you add it to the menu? Well, let's hit 12, F12 rather. I'll go back. If you don't like hitting F12, you can hit go to definition. Anyway, so what happens when you add it to the menu? Well, it instantiates an inventory menu item toggle prefab. Okay. And the inventory menu item toggle prefab is in a game object that has the inventory menu item toggle script on it. So when this thing gets instantiated, its start function will get called, because that's how Unity works. And when its start function gets called, the sprite will update to that of the associated inventory object. Now, previously, we were making this thing a serialized field, and we were initializing it that way. But instead, we want to be able to set this thing based on whatever, where's our add to menu? Oh yeah, right here. We want to set it based on this, right? This is the item that we're adding to the menu. So we want to be able to set that icon based on whatever's being passed in here. So somehow I have to be able to set the associated menu item, or the associated inventory object rather, right inside of this function. So that means I'm going to have to go back to this script, and I'm going to have to actually make a property that exposes this to the outside world. So we'll say public inventory object, capital A associated inventory object, and I'm going to make a getter and a setter for this thing. So for the getter, we're just going to return associated inventory object with a lowercase a. So this encapsulated field will be returned when you access this. Now when you set the associated inventory object, I'm going to kind of change how we were doing this just to use a property in a neat way. I'm going to get rid of this start method. I'm going to control X this line because I'm going to use that still, just use it elsewhere. And I'm going to say that when you set the associated inventory object, first thing we need to do is set the encapsulated field equal to the value that you pass in. But then the second thing I want to do is change the icon image sprite to match the new associated inventory object's icon. So basically, whenever you update the associated inventory object, the icon will update along with it, which is pretty cool. Just a cool use for properties is if you want to change something whenever the property's value changes, you can do that within the setter of the property. All right, but because I made this thing public, if I go back to my add item to menu, I can set the inventory menu item toggles associated inventory object to this thing. Almost. The problem is this instantiate method is going to create a thing of the type game object, but I'm not saving a reference to that thing. So if I just run this right now, you'll see a new game object get created. I'll just do it. Let's save everything, go back to Unity, and I'll run the game. Why don't I at this point actually, before I run the game, let's go in here and just delete these things out. So you start with an empty menu. Alright, so I'm going to run the game and click on an inventory object. And when I click an inventory object, remember it's going to call, where's my inventory object, interact with. So it's going to call all the stuff. One of these adds something to the menu. When you add something to the menu, it instantiates the thing. Alright, so let's see what that actually does. I clicked it. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but we did get this. This inventory item toggle got added to my scene. You can tell things that have been added through Instantiate because it calls them a clone. So if you look at the hierarchy here while the game's running, you have this clone. If I stop the game, this thing will go away because it doesn't exist in my scene. It only exists once I click the inventory object. So if I click both of them, I should get two of these little clones. There's one. There's two. If I look at them, you should see that one of them, okay, well that's all this. So it's not quite working right. And not only is it not like setting this correctly, but if I look at my menu, they're not showing up in here either. So the game objects are getting added to the scene, but they're not getting added in the right way.